recall the first day I met Bennett. It was a hot June evening, and I was in science class conducting some kind of boring practical experiment. That was until Danny Hughes took it upon himself to wrap tape around my mouth, which I instinctively ripped off, which in turn took the top layer of skin off my lips. Both lips bled, and people laughed, and I felt anger beginning to rise. Before I could voice my disapproval, I got punched in the gut, and then shoved so hard that I landed on my ass. The teacher at the time, Mr. Doyle, knew exactly what was going on, but I guess he figured that he didn't get paid enough to do anything about it. So I found myself on the dusty floor of one of those old science rooms, with a bloody mouth and a pain in my gut. But I guess that wasn't enough for Danny and his buddies, so they decided to pull my pants down and then tried to pull them off. But that was before Mr. Doyle finally stepped in with a very lethargic, "That was quite enough. Everyone get on with what you're meant to be doing." It all settled down, and I got myself up off the floor, my lips still leaking. Everyone was looking and whispering, and I felt nothing but ashamed and embarrassed. The fat kid who was made to look stupid once again. I was so sick and tired of it. "Sir, I need to get some tissue for my mouth," I said to Mr. Doyle. He glanced up at me, not a single ounce of concern showing on his face, because the old bastard knew exactly what had happened to me. He just didn't care. "Yes, go then. Don't be too long. I want your results by the end of the lesson," he said. I don't think I responded, though I imagine the words, "stick your results up your ass," might have gone through my mind at the time. I left that hot room, wanting to just take a break from the shame that I felt. I was nothing but an overweight laughingstock. I never had a girlfriend, or being cool. Sure, I had a few friends, but they all tended to be the same as me. All a little weird and somewhat unpopular. I guess we all just gravitated towards each other because we all felt kind of invisible. Though there were times I wished I was actually invisible. Then I wouldn't have got picked on so much, and whenever the trouble did start, well, those friends of mine would just lower their heads and hope Danny's attention didn't shift to them. I walked out of the classroom, which was housed in the old science block. It was an old building which sat on the outskirts of the school grounds, and was used sparingly as the new classrooms weren't enough to house all the students. As I left the room, I walked in front of one of the big air conditioning vents, and felt the cool air blast against me. I stopped, turned, and just stood, letting the cold air hit my hot, sweaty body. It felt amazing. So amazing that I closed my eyes in some kind of trance. When I opened them, I almost jumped right out of my skin. As stood in front of me was a man who looked to be around 6'7" or 8" in a long, white lab coat. He just stood, watching me as he chomped on an apple. "Sorry to startle you, son," he said in a low, calm voice. "Oh, sure you did. You're so big too. Kinda made it worse." The man smiled. "Gets hot in this block, doesn't it? Standing in front of one of these vents is always a nice relief. Your lips are bleeding, by the way." I put my hand to my mouth and wiped off the blood. "Yeah, I know. I'm just going to clean it." The man nodded. "I see. Say, were you part of all that fuss I could hear?" "Well, yeah. I was the one getting embarrassed as usual. I don't ever start it. I just have to put up with it." "I see," the big man said. "So you're being bullied, you mean?" "Yeah, I guess that's what you'd call it." "And who's bullying you?" "It's a kid called Danny Hughes. He's never liked me, but I don't know what I've done apart from being a bit fat. But he and his friends just never leave me alone." The big man threw the apple core into a nearby bin and folded his arms. He then looked me up and down. "I used to be the same, you know." "You were a bully?" "No," he said. "I was bullied just like you. Carried a little weight too as a boy." "Well, you don't look fat now," I said. "And neither will you. You'll grow up into a big strong man. And trust me, when that happens, nobody will come picking on you then. You're gonna be just fine." "You think so?" "I know so. I can tell by the way you're built. Just stick with things and keep your chin up. Everything will work out as it's meant to be. What's your name?" "Henry," I replied. The big man held out a large hand. "My name is Bennett." I shook it, my own hand totally engulfed by his huge paw. "Are you a teacher?" I asked. "Not quite. I work in science, and they let me use the old block here to do my little experiments." "Well, I best go get cleaned up. Otherwise Mr. Doyle will just moan at me again." "Well, it was nice to meet you, Henry. Look after yourself." "You too, sir," I said. And with that, I went and sorted myself out. A couple of days went past and Dan and his friends didn't really bother me. They would shout the odd bit of abuse, but nobody came to me. And I could handle the name calling. Sticks and stones, right? A few days later, I had what I guess you call a good day at school. I had no hassle. A few laughs at break time, and my lessons weren't too bad. It all seemed to go pretty quick, and when that final bell rang in the afternoon, I was almost sad it was over. I walked out of the school gates and couldn't see anyone I knew too well, so I just carried on up the hill. The phrase, "too good to be true," sure does like to pop its head up now and again, to remind us that it's still a thing. I'd gotten about halfway up the hill when I heard that familiar call of, "Hey fat ass," from somewhere behind me. I didn't have to look back to know it was me the voice was referring to. I also knew that voice only too well. Danny Hughes. I continued to walk on, as it didn't sound too close, and I tried to walk a little faster but not make it too obvious. I wasn't a tough guy. I didn't have an ego as such, but I didn't want to be seen running away. Those kids were like a pack of dogs, and if they sensed fear, you would whip them up into a frenzy. The abuse continued. Fat piece of shit, heavy ass Henry, fat motherfucker, but it was nothing I hadn't heard before. So I just continued on and willed myself to get to the top of the hill, because once there, I had to turn left, whereas those boys all had to go right. I hoped they would lose interest at that point, seeing it as too much effort to walk my way. The top of the hill was well in sight, and I had hope in my heart. That was until I heard the sound of numerous footsteps hitting the concrete as they began to chase me up the hill. Panic spread through me like wildfire, and I looked back for the first time to see Danny and his two sycophants sprinting up behind me, a look of some primal aggression on their faces. I broke out into a sweat, and that was before I'd even started running. But run, I did. I was never the most athletic of kids, and running was definitely not my strong point. However, it's funny what the thought of a good ass kicking can make you do. I ran for my life, and hoped that the distance already between us would be enough to make up for my lack of speed. I saw the top of the street, and thought if I could just reach it and turn left, they might just let me go. But that little ray of hope fizzled out when I felt something smack against my right foot, which caused me to stumble forwards. I didn't quite hit the ground, however. I managed to stay on my feet. I stopped, breathing heavily, and turned around to see the three of them standing right in front of me. "Well, look at your fat ass moving like that," Danny said. He was breathing a little heavy, but nothing like I was. "I just want to go home," I said. "I bet you do," Danny replied with a smile. "What, so you can sit on the sofa and eat potato chips all night?" "Whatever I do at home is my business," I replied. "Oh, you think so?" "Well, I say it's my fucking business," Danny replied. "I worry about you, little fat piggy." I looked into the face of that kid, and I just felt so fucking angry. Why me? Why anybody? Why couldn't he just leave me the hell alone? I then spoke but thought the thought actually registered. "Why do you have to be such an asshole all the time?" I asked. Danny's eyes widened. He then started to laugh. He then looked at his two minions, who also started to laugh. "Well, geez," Danny said, looking back at me. "Somebody seems to have found their little balls. Did you call me an asshole, fat boy?" I felt my mouth dry in an instant. "No, I asked why you had to act like one. It's not the same But before I could finish my sentence, Danny swung a fist and hit me right in the mouth. I stumbled back, and he lunged forward, shoving me. And as I was already going in that direction, everything just accelerated, and I ended up flat on my back on the ground looking up at him. "This isn't how this works," he said, leering down at me. "I get to call you names, and you get to shut the fuck up. Do you understand?" I just looked up at him, and once again words passed through my lips before I had any time to vet them. "Fuck you," I said. The beating that followed seemed like it was never going to end. The three of them moved in, punching, kicking, and stamping. I just tried to crawl away as the few times I tried to get up, I was punched back to the ground. I remember beginning to feel woozy as a sneaker made contact with my jaw, but I wasn't completely out. I could hear onlookers saying things like, "Come on man, he's had enough," and "Leave the poor kid alone." But nobody was brave enough to put a stop to it. I heard somebody spit on me, and I was called a few more names. Danny then grabbed the back of my hair and tried to punch my face multiple times, and I just tried my best to cover up. I began to wonder if those kids were really going to beat me to death. The next thing I recall was the sound of screeching tires and a loud voice. The beating stopped, and I lay there for a few moments, face down, trying to get my breath. I then felt strong hands lift me up off the ground, and although everything was a little blurred, I found myself looking up at Bennett. "Come on, kid. Get in the van," he said. I staggered to the passenger side and climbed in. He handed me some water and then a rag to wipe the blood from my face. I'm not sure how long I sat there, but eventually my head started to clear. "Are they gone?" I asked. "For now. You took a hell of a beating back there. You're a tough son of a gun." "It would be better to know how to actually fight," I said. "Being tough usually means you've had your ass kicked." "Well, there's classes for that, but you're tough, so that's a great foundation." "I guess," I replied, blowing my nose to get the blood out. "At those same kids, huh?" he asked. "Yeah, just a bunch of assholes," I replied. "It sure seems that way. Well, let's get you home safe. Where do you live?" I gave Bennett the directions and he drove steadily back to mine. He didn't park too close as he said it might look a little weird to my parents. Not that I think they would have noticed. I thanked him and made my way home. I remember walking through the door to see my mom cooking. She was always cooking. My parents were both large people. They loved food and encouraged me to be the same. "Well, hey, honey," my mom said. That was until she looked at me and started to cry. Both my mother and father were good people, but they were soft. They hated hostility or violence, and would avoid any type of confrontation. They'd always seemed to have gotten along just fine being like that. I could tell neither of them had been exposed to the kind of hurt and humiliation that I was experiencing on almost a daily basis. My mama asked me what happened and I told her the truth, and she, in her usual fashion, didn't really say too much. It was almost like me telling her was giving her a problem that she didn't want to have. So, rather than offer up any kind of solution, or get mad that someone had hurt her child, she just said things like, "Oh dear," and "Oh my baby," none of which was going to ease the situation one bit. My dad got home a little later. I was in bed watching TV. Well, his response was much the same. He asked me a little about the kids who had done it, but didn't so much as curse them. He just took it all in and ruffled my hair. Truth be told, he didn't know what to do. My parents didn't contact the school, or complain. I think they were probably worried that something might escalate outside of school hours. Either the kids showing up, or some kind of family feud. My dad was a very loving man, and he would take all the time in the world to show me stuff, and teach me little things. But although it kinda hurts to say, the man was a total coward. I was kept away from school until my wounds pretty much healed up. I don't know what my parents had told the school, I just knew I was dreading going back. For a week or so I was completely left alone by Danny and his friends. I think they probably felt the severity of the beating they'd given me would suffice for a little while. Part of me wondered if they even felt a little bit bad about it, but I soon found out that was definitely not the case. I had just eaten my lunch. I was about to go to my math class when I felt the urge to take a leak. I was emptying my bladder when I heard footsteps behind me, and that in itself did not alarm me. But when I heard the bathroom get pushed shut, I felt the moisture drain from my throat. "Long time no see, fat boy," said that familiar voice. The next thing I know, there was a foot against my ass, pushing me forward into the urinal, which of course led the front of my shorts being covered in piss and water. I pushed myself away, and turned around only to be met with a hard punch that landed just above my left eye. I cowered a little, feeling the vicious sting that blow caused. "Good shot," said one of his friends. "Good, but I must do better. Story of my life," Danny said, which led all three of them to laugh. There was the sound of someone trying to get into the bathroom, but one of Danny's friends shouted "fuck off" and held the door shut. The handle went still, and the boys' attention returned to me. "I bet you thought we beat you bad last time, huh?" I said nothing. "Well, it's only gonna get worse, you fat fuck. I've decided I'm really gonna start hurting you, and eventually maybe even worse than just beating the shit out of you. What do you gotta say about that?" I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I just wanted it all to stop, but I said nothing. A punch landed in my stomach which caused me to bend forward. It was a shot Danny was real happy with, as he let out a whoop of excitement. "Try that knee to the face on him," one of Danny's friends said. And with that I felt Danny grab my hair with both hands, and I knew what was coming. Or at least I thought I did. The loud sound of the fire bell belted out in the speakers in the hall, and Danny let go of my hair. The boys seemed to instantly lose interest in me, and within seconds were out of the toilet, obviously happy in the fact it would mean everyone would be walking to the schoolyard instead of their next lesson. I didn't really care about the fire. I wasn't scared. I was starting to not care too much about anything. I went to the sink and washed my face. The pain in my stomach was still there. I looked in the mirror, hating what I saw looking back at me. Just an out-of-shape victim, and piss on the front of his shorts. I eventually left the toilet, and slowly started making my way down the empty hallway, when I saw Bennett leaning against the wall, arms folded. "Hey," I said, without much enthusiasm. "Hey kid, you okay?" he asked. I just shrugged. "You better go outside," I said. "That's the fire bell." "I know it is," he replied with a smile. "I'm the one who set it off." I looked at the big man, confused for a moment. "Where's the fire?" I asked. He laughed. "There is no fire, Henry. I saw those boys follow you into the bathroom. I knew what was likely to happen, so I tried to think of a way to stop it. I couldn't go bursting in there. The school is letting me use their facilities for my own little experiments. I can't risk being thrown out, so I had to think smart." I smiled. "Well, good thinking. It did the trick, as I was cruising for a bruising." But what?" he asked. Well, it's only postponed. It's gonna happen again at some point and again. I found myself choking up as I said those words. The realization that I was stuck in this cycle of abuse and violence for God knows how long dawned on me, and I knew it was only gonna get worse. Well, yes, son, about that, Bennett said. What about it? I asked. I think the main culprit, that Danny Hughes, well, I think he needs to start learning a lesson or two. What goes around comes around, as they say. And once he backs off, believe me, the others will leave you alone. They're probably just as scared of him as you are, but better the devil you know, right? I couldn't help but feel a flame of hope ignite in my stomach. So what we gonna do? I asked. Bennett smiled. I've got a little plan, Henry. It'll be a good start to teach old Danny boy a lesson. He likes girls, right? Oh yeah, he does. I don't like him too much though. He's always rude and horrible to them, even the ones he actually likes. Bennett nodded. And who would you say he likes the most? Who's that one girl he would love to date given the chance? Oh, that's an easy one, I said, because it's the same girl pretty much everyone else would love to date. Her name is Tara Vickers. She's real pretty, and real nice too. Very good, Bennett said. So I've thought about this. We need to start with a little bit of humiliation. So tomorrow at 2:15 p.m. I want you to go to room B2 in the old science block. Nobody is allowed in that room, I said. It's falling to bits in there. Precisely, Henry, which makes it perfect for what I need. So you need to be in there at 2:15. And what I want you to do is get into the large brown cupboard at the back of the class. I'm going to get a message to Danny that the woman of his dreams wants to meet him. He should arrive around 2:30, thinking he might get to steal a kiss or maybe more from good old Tara Vickers. However, what he won't expect is the potent blue dye I'm going to put above the door, which will not only cover him and ruin every item of clothing he's wearing, but it will be an absolute nightmare to wash off of his skin. There's 2 classes due to start in the opposite room, so I'm hoping that when he runs out, angry and embarrassed, you'll also get a nice audience to witness it, and these little instances are going to be a common occurrence in his life until he learns to stop being such a little asshole. I was sporting a big smile as I listened to the big man talk, and I sure was excited to watch the not-so-great Danny Hughes get to make look real stupid. Why are you doing this for me? I asked. I just don't like bullies, Bennett replied, and you seem like a good kid. Well, thanks, I said. No problem, he replied. You make sure you're in that cupboard at 2:15, and do not let him see you. He'll never put you together with this, if you follow my instructions. I gave a little salute, and then turned to make my way outside. I reached classroom B2 at 2:15 on the dot the following day. I'd had 15 minutes or so left of class, but made some bullshit excuse to my teacher that I had a real bad stomach and I had to go. I was a good student, so she smiled and just hoped that I was okay. I walked into that dusty old classroom and got myself comfortable in the large cupboard in the back of the class. I waited in silence and then watched through the slats of the cupboard door as Bennett came in and put a very large, heavy-looking bucket on top of the door. The classroom had another door which led to the science doors, so after positioning the bucket, Bennett looked towards me, winked, and then his big frame passed through the second doorway, and he was gone. And then I just stood, hunched over a little, waiting. Around 10 minutes later, the kids who were due in the other classroom started to pass by the windows, most of which I could see from my vantage point. And then I saw the taller figure of Danny, pushing his way past everyone to get to the woman of his dreams. Excitement bubbled in my gut as I was about to witness the guy who had made my life so miserable get his first comeuppance. I remember thinking, any second now, and then watched as he pushed open the door. He walked in with his usual air of arrogance, and was instantly met with the contents of the bucket. But as I watched it fall, the first thing I noticed, to my utter disappointment, was that the bane of my existence did not turn blue. In fact, it seemed that the fluid inside the bucket was clear. Was it just water, I thought? Within seconds it became very clear that whatever was in that bucket, it was no water. As I watched Dan's surprise give way to what looked like panic, and then pain. He stood, soaked in the bucket's contents, and began to scream. And even though I was at the back of the classroom, I could see what looked like steam or smoke coming off of his skin. He turned this way and that, screaming and rubbing in his face. And realizing something had gone very wrong, I emerged from the cupboard and slowly made my way towards him, knowing he was in no way a threat to me at that moment. But the closer I got, the more I could see his face seemed to be melting. Skin hung from his fingers as it slid away from the bone, and his face started to droop, with blood pouring from his eyes. And then his eyes began to liquefy and drip down out of the holes in his skull. His ears resembled melting ice creams, sliding down the sides of his head, cheeks melting and falling. He tried to scream, but as the seconds passed they became nothing more than gargling noises as whatever had covered him tore its way through his mouth and down his throat. He gripped at his neck, obviously trying to draw in a breath, and all I could do was stand, open-mouthed and in total shock, as other students began to gather at the classroom door, some screaming and crying. I watched as what was once a teenage boy was now a corpse, sank to its knees, his head not much more than a skull covered in mush, before falling face first onto the floor with a wet, sloppy sound. In the weeks that followed, I was asked a lot of questions, but again and again, I told my story. The problem was that neither the police nor the school could find any trace of Bennett. The school claimed they had never heard of him. The big man seemed to have just disappeared. My saving grace was Danny's friends, who had seen the big man get out of his truck on the day they were all kicking my ass. None of us could recall the make of his vehicle, other than the fact it was large and white. Eventually, as the months passed, the police stopped bothering me, and I managed, after some time away from school, to settle back into everyday life. Danny's friends seemed to go into themselves a little, and didn't so much as look at me when we passed each other. They didn't seem to bully anyone after that. I was left to enjoy school life as much as I could. My parents never really asked me much about what happened, about what I'd seen, or who this mysterious Bennett was. They just hugged me a lot and tried to feed me more food. But my appetite was never quite the same after the day that Danny died, and I even ended up joining a gym. Life treated me a little better after that. I worked out, learned to box, and my confidence grew. Hey, I eventually even started to date. That was until I met my current wife, Abigail. The most wonderful person I've ever met. And through her I've had my first child, Honey. Such a sweet, kind-hearted little girl. Well, that's almost the end of the story. There is one last part. Last Tuesday, I took Honey to the park. It was a crisp, bright day, so the park was pretty busy. I stood pushing her on the swing, thinking of when I used to hang out at that park with my friends, none of whom I speak to anymore. I happened to notice a boy, a little larger around the edges as I used to be. He was walking around, all alone, holding a metal detector. I then watched as 4 other boys approached him, and at first I thought they were his friends. But after watching both his and their body language, I could soon see they were harassing the poor kid. One of them, the tallest of the group, snatched the metal detector from him, and I could see that, although none of them actually struck him, he seemed to cower at their movements. It was obviously not the first time these boys had picked on him. I thought about shouting over, telling them to leave him alone, but then I saw another boy arrive with a football, and the 4 bullies seemed to lose interest in their victim and walked away. I watched the lonely boy pick up his metal detector, and I could see that he lost interest in whatever he was doing. I knew just how he was feeling, and the worry and the nerves that would be sitting in his gut, making him feel sick, as he asked himself what he'd done to deserve to be treated like that. The boy walked away down a path towards the bottom exit of the park. Then I saw something else that I can't shake. From the trees onto the boy's left appeared a tall, broad man. He was wearing a jacket and pants, not a white coat, but I knew the instant I saw him, it was Bennett. But whereas at 42, looking nothing like the overweight kid I was back at school, Bennett had not changed one bit. How that was, I do not know. But I did know that Bennett wasn't one of us. Was he an angel? Was he a ghost? Was he something more sinister? I don't have the answer. I watched as he put a large hand on the boy's shoulder, and they both walked down the path together, and then I smiled, because I knew that the kid who was with him, although he wouldn't know it yet, his life was about to get much better. And also, I knew that that tall, mean kid who had took his metal detector away, well, he was fucked.